Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into some of the cut NPCs from Fallout New Vegas. The first NPC on our list is Attekus, a legionary. Now, the interesting thing about Attekus is a version of him exists in the full game, named Veteran Attekus. He exists at the Legion safe house where all of their really high-powered gear is that you get once you unlock a certain reputation with them. However, this version is said to be placed at the fort, and killing him actually fails these quests: Caesar's Hire and Beware the Wrath of Caesar. His inventory pool is pretty much the same as his full release version. He's got veteran armor, a matching veteran helmet, random food, and random Legion approved chemicals, so that's like their healing powder, things like that, water, and either a machete or a chainsaw. At one point in time, there were going to be beggars spread throughout Freeside who have a very specific beggar AI in order to harass the player character for caps, among other things. These were seemingly cut because, as many of you may know or may not know, Fallout New Vegas had a very short turnaround time when it came to development. It was about 18 months, and a lot of things had to be downsized in order to work on the consoles. So the Vegas Strip, for example, was going to be one continuous area before it was chopped up into bits. Freeside was also meant to have a much higher population. Really, all of the areas in the game were meant to have a much higher population, however, it was cut down. This is an example of some NPCs who got cut for that reason, because they're pretty much finished. They have animations that can be played, such as ask for help, swatting, scratching self, and in the final game, there's only one beggar, and that would be Rotface. There was an NPC labeled as a better that is pretty much scrubbed from the game. The only evidence that we have of its existence is some player-specific dialogue that really doesn't enlighten us. One theory is that he may have been an early prisoner in an early version of Reynolds. However, he's been deleted from the GEC, which, for reference, the GEC in-game is the Garden of Eden creation kit. However, in the Fallout game engine, the GEC is sort of like, you can correct me if I'm wrong coding people, but to my understanding, it's sort of like, it's an integral part of the engine. Billy Bettis wears the roving trader outfit and has a sawed-off shotgun. Now, there is not really specific information about where Billy would appear. However, based on his editor ID, it appears he would have spawned south of Vegas. This would include areas like Camp McCarran, the Sharecropper Farms, West Side, those areas. The Bowen family members is another very interesting set of NPCs. The reason it's so interesting is because I always love, and I've discussed this in my videos on Until Dawn, as well as many other deep dive cut content videos that I've done. Because these NPCs are essentially placeholders used to help work out the early dialogue for Lily's questline. Lily being the schizophrenic nightkin that you can meet at Jacobstown. However, the interesting thing is that Jimmy and Becky are included in this. Her children who never really actually make an appearance within the game. They're placed in a test cell called Cell for Dead Void Creatures. They were used in order to deliver lines and test dialogue trees early on. There's an NPC who was most likely a casino guard, most likely Vault 21, as his inventory package is the same of what a male Vault 21 resident would have. He has some dialogue lines, and in the editor ID he's referred to as a casino bouncer. If the player uses the Wild Wasteland trait, which I know I always do, I know it takes up a slot, but I really enjoy all the wacky things that you can find within Fallout. When doing the quest related to Fisto and you leave the facility, a group of old ladies wearing pink dresses holding rolling pins and other items will jump the player character. Caddy Clara is a cut member of this gang. Next up we have Carlisle St. Clair III. This is basically an unused version of him where he's a corpse. He doesn't have any AI attached to him or anything like that. Dixon is a drug dealer in Freeside. He sells various chems as well as his own mixture of jet, known as Dixon's Jet. Early on in development, he actually had 2 bodyguards who would be with him at all time. However, they were cut. They would have a varmint rifle chambered in 22, as well as Merc veteran outfits. At one point in time, there were drill sergeants as well as new recruits for the NCR visible at Camp McCarran. They all have their own individual lines and very unique lines. They don't just repeat the same "patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish for a nuclear winter." They have their own individual lines. However, they were cut due to memory issues on consoles. Another example of a test NPC, we have drunk test male and drunk test female. Basically, they were just used to test the drunk animations where people are stumbling down the streets of Vegas, that kind of thing. However, the funny thing is, each of them are carrying a Centaur spit missile projectile, which is used as ammunition for their vomiting animation, which that's really interesting how you have to sort of work out the weird little kinks like that when programming a very unique animation. There was an early version of Elizabeth Kieran meant to be a corpse. She has no AI attached to her, and so it appears that at some point in her quest line or whatever, she was able to die. However, in the final game, the only way that she dies is by accident or by the hands of the player. There were male and female escorts meant to be at the Atomic Wrangler at one point in time. They both wear the sexy sleepwear outfits. However, they were ultimately cut, and getting escorts for the Atomic Wrangler would become its very own quest. There was a merchant named Felicia who was originally meant to be stationed outside of the Sunset Sarsaparilla HQ. Now, there's really hardly any evidence of her existing at all. The only thing that lets us know that she really existed was an ID prefix for a vendor package titled Felicia's Merchant Container. Later sources would say that she would trade Blue Star bottle caps for various items such as mini nukes, missile launchers, really extreme stuff. At one point in time, a follower's doctor was going to appear at the Hoover Dam. The main theory behind what their purpose was is that in the post-game content, which ended up having to be scrapped, they were going to be there helping out, post the battle, that kind of thing. The character Hawkins is actually still in the game, however, he's dead and just labeled as a powder ganger corpse. He can be found in Quarry Junction, surrounded by 3 Deathclaws. Originally, he was going to be part of a quest in Quarry Junction. He would have had dialogue, that sort of thing. However, his questline was removed from the game. However, his corpse was left there. There's an unused version of the Legate Lanius who wears the basic Legion armor as well as his normal helmet. However, his version is titled Legion Oliver Fake Legate. That's what he's called internally. It's possible that he's a leftover from some sort of cut Legion quest line, maybe sort of assassinating the Legate and somebody takes his place. I don't really know. But I do know that he ordered 9/10 of his forces to kill the other 1/10. And you thought your boss was a pain. It's my favorite radio thing. I don't know why. There is an unused version of the Legion Centurion. However, the difference is very, very minor. He's overall exactly the same. However, in the game, they are just known as Centurion. In this version, they are titled Legion Centurion. There is a cut NPC called Legion Messenger, which basically he wears the motorcycle helmet, the metal armor, has a machete, and basic raider loot on his person. But he has no dialogue recorded or even written down, so we really don't know what his message was. It's possible that he was an early version of Volpes, or it's also possible that when you get into a low standing with the Legion, he would have been the one to come out and say, "Oh, you have this many days to fix your reputation." Mayor Stein is the unseen mayor of Nipton, and originally it appears he would have shown up in the game as a corpse. His faction is listed as the Powder Gangers, and he wears some pre-war business wear. Meg Reynolds was the mayor of a place that was completely removed from Fallout New Vegas, known as the Underpass. Carlisle actually lives near where the settlement was. She was a quest giver for a sort of mini quest where they needed help fixing their water purifier. There was an unused version of Mr. House as a humanoid NPC, however, this was purely a test, basically just to fix the dialogue trees, things like that. And at no point, it should not be interpreted as Mr. House would have shown up as a humanoid at all in the game. Pablo Miller is a wasteland adventurer who appears to be connected to Billy Bettis. At the very least, they were created around the same time, so it's possible that they were connected. There was an early version of Paladin Ramos who was equipped with a plasma rifle rather than a Gauss rifle. There is an unused version of Papa Khan who would have actually appeared at the Great Khan settlement near Quarry Junction. Originally, there were going to be various deputies who would appear at Prim after the player completes the My Kind of Town quest. They each relate to a specific faction, so it would either be NCR, Powder Ganger, etc. Ranger Gomez was actually originally supposed to guard the monorail. However, there's no clear connection between this Ranger Gomez and the Ranger Gomez who can be found at the NCR safe house. An early placeholder of Red Lucy had some slight differences. Her karma was actually set to evil, which is very interesting because in the final game, she's neutral. At one point in time, there was a specific NPC called the Right Master who was going to induct the player into the Great Khans. The only evidence of this is just some small bits of dialogue that pretty much confirm it. This one's kind of funny. There is Ron the narrator. This is the placeholder NPC that reads out the opening and end credits, of course voiced by Ron Perlman. He's actually present in the scenes where you're looking at the sort of slideshow of your choices or the slideshow of the setup. He's just off screen. At one point in time, there was an NPC who is believed to be the sole survivor of Vault 11. His name is Roy. It's possible that there was more to the Vault 11 questline. Maybe you would have tried to find the sole survivor or something along those lines. And finally, we have, and I'm not kidding, Testicles the Debug Centurion. He's a one-eyed old man in Legion Centurion armor, and he is basically there to test various debug functions. So we'll read the list. Change the fate of President Aaron Kimball. Change your faction reputation to all types of reputation with all factions. Change the current state of the Great Khans and the Boomers. Change the variables for events outside the Strip. Change the outcome of Camp Forlorn Hope and Nelson. Change the variables for events on the Strip. Change the variables for Benny, the Securitron, Army, Caesar, the Howitzer, and the Fort. Change the variables for visiting the Lucky 38, giving Mr. House the Platinum Chip, upgrading the Strip's Securitrons, and the El Dorado Power Station jumpstarting the Lucky 38's reactor. Change the variable for killing the Deathclaw Alpha Male and the Mother at Quarry Junction. Change the variables for killing Benny at the Tops, Benny fleeing and getting captured at the Fort, Securitron Vault being destroyed, killing Mr. House, allying the Boomers with the Legion, killing the Boomers leaders, allied the White Glove Society and the Legion, killing the White Glove Society leaders, failing to revert the White Glove Society to cannibalism with non-violence, destroying the Brotherhood of Steel, and putting Caesar in a coma during Render unto Caesar. Change the variables for surviving Benny's trap, Benny fleeing the Strip, initiating combat, speaking to, seeing, seducing, and killing Benny at the Tops, setting the endgame slideshow by changing who won the second battle of Hoover Dam, the Courier's gender and karma, the fate of Tabitha, the Boomers, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Fiends, the Followers of the Apocalypse, Good Springs, the Great Khans, Jacobstown, the Kings, the Camp Golf Misfits, Novak, Vault 19 Prim, and Chief Hannon, the outcome of Raoul, Veronica, Arcade, Cass, Lily, Rex, Boone, and the Enclave Remnants. So pretty much exactly what I said. He's the debug tool, and I just think it's funny that you kind of get a peek at the sense of humor that the developers had with him being Testicles the Centurion. So thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's not a Life is Strange video, and I like to branch off here and there, but I always come back to it, don't worry. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would love to create more Fallout content. I really enjoy doing it, and it's one of my all-time favorite series, so if I get to ramble about that to you guys and you'll listen, I'd really appreciate that. Leave some comments for series and other games that you would like me to take a look at. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or, whatever.